What if a single unscripted moment could shake an entire television network and quietly end one of the most influential sitcoms in American history? For millions of viewers in the 1950s, The Honeymooners was more than a comedy. It was loud, messy, emotional, and deeply human. At a time when television was filled with polished suburban families and perfect living rooms, Jackie Gleason introduced audiences to Ralph Cramden, a struggling Brooklyn bus driver with impossible dreams, a short temper, and a heart bigger than his paycheck. The series changed television forever. But behind the laughter, catchphrases, and legendary performances was a growing tension that eventually exploded during one unforgettable live broadcast. According to stories that circulated for years behind studio doors, one line delivered differently than ever before caused the audience to fall completely silent. Network executives panicked. Sponsors became nervous. And within months, one of television's greatest sitcoms was gone. The rise and fall of the Honeymooners is not just a story about comedy. It is a story about political fear, live television pressure, censorship, and the dangerous line between realism and entertainment. Jackie Gleason's life began far from the glamour of Hollywood. Born in Brooklyn in 1916, he grew up surrounded by poverty, struggle, and uncertainty. His father abandoned the family when Gleason was still a child, leaving his mother to raise him alone while working exhausting jobs just to survive. The streets of Brooklyn became his classroom. Gleason absorbed everything around him, the arguments pouring from apartment windows, the frustrations of working-class families, and the humor people use to survive difficult lives. Those experiences would later shape the character that made him famous. Before television, Gleason worked odd jobs and spent years struggling to break into entertainment. He performed in nightclubs and variety shows, developing a style that mixed physical comedy with emotional realism. Audiences loved him because he felt authentic. He was not polished or refined. He was explosive, unpredictable, and relatable. By the early 1950s, Gleason had his own television program, Cavalcade of Stars. It was there that viewers first met Ralph Cramden. Unlike other television fathers of the era, Ralph was not wise, calm, or respectable. He yelled, failed constantly, and dreamed of becoming rich through ridiculous schemes that always collapsed. Yet audiences adored him. Ralph represented something television rarely showed at the time: the frustrations of ordinary working people. He lived in a cramped apartment. He worried about money. He argued with his wife. He made mistakes. Instead of pretending life was perfect, the Honeymooners embraced imperfection. A major reason for the show's success was the character of Alice Cramden. Unlike many sitcom wives of the 1950s, Alice was intelligent, sarcastic, and fearless. She refused to be intimidated by Ralph's loud personality and often defeated him with a single perfectly timed remark. Originally, Alice was played by Pert Kelton. Her version of the character was fiery and aggressive, matching Ralph's energy almost line for line. The chemistry between Kelton and Gleason gave the early sketches a rough, realistic edge. But suddenly, Kelton disappeared from the show. Publicly, CBS claimed she left for health reasons. In reality, the situation was tied to political paranoia of the Red Scare. During the 1950s, Hollywood and television networks became obsessed with rooting out suspected communist sympathizers. Careers were destroyed by rumors alone. Kelton's husband had reportedly come under scrutiny for alleged political associations, and CBS feared controversy. Without public discussion or explanation, Kelton was quietly removed. Her replacement, Audrey Meadows, almost did not get the role. Network executives believed she looked too glamorous to portray a struggling Brooklyn housewife. Determined to prove them wrong, Meadows arrived at auditions wearing plain clothes, minimal makeup, and styled herself like an exhausted working-class woman. Jackie Gleason immediately knew she was perfect. Meadows transformed Alice into a calmer, sharper presence. Instead of shouting back at Ralph, she let his anger burn itself out before delivering a devastatingly clever response. The new dynamic gave the show emotional balance and made audiences believe Ralph and Alice truly loved each other beneath the constant arguments. When The Honeymooners became its own standalone series in 1955, it broke nearly every television rule of the era. Most sitcoms presented idealized American families living in spotless suburban homes. Shows such as Father Knows Best portrayed fathers as calm sources of wisdom and mothers as endlessly patient homemakers. The Honeymooners rejected all of that. The Cramdens lived in a tiny apartment with worn furniture and peeling walls. Ralph was insecure and impulsive. Alice was frustrated and sarcastic. Their conversations felt less like scripted television and more like real marital arguments overheard through apartment walls. The realism shocked audiences, but also made the show revolutionary. Jackie Gleason's background and live performance gave each episode the feeling of a stage play. The comedy moved quickly, fueled by sharp dialogue and emotional tension. There was no artificial polish. Every laugh came naturally from the audience watching live in the studio. That raw energy made the series feel alive. The show also created some of the most famous catchphrases in television history. Ralph's exaggerated line, "Bang! Zoom! To the moon, Alice!" became instantly recognizable across America. At the time, audiences understood it as cartoonish frustration rather than a genuine threat. But eventually, that line would become the center of controversy. In October 1956, the Honeymooners aired an episode titled The Deciding Vote. The story itself was classic Ralph Cramden material. Ralph became convinced that his vote in a local election could decide the outcome, inflating his ego and creating chaos. For most of the broadcast, everything proceeded normally. Then came the moment that people would talk about for decades. During an argument with Alice, Gleason delivered the famous bang, "Zoom, straight to the moon" line. But according to accounts from crew members and viewers, something felt different this time. His tone was colder. Instead of exaggerating the line for comedic effect, Gleason reportedly delivered it with unusual seriousness. He moved closer to Audrey Meadows. His expression hardened. The joke suddenly stopped sounding playful, and the audience stopped laughing. The silence inside the studio was immediate and unsettling. In live television, silence can feel louder than applause. Crew members later claimed the atmosphere changed instantly. For a brief moment, Ralph Cramden no longer seemed like a lovable loudmouth. He seemed genuinely threatening. That distinction mattered enormously in the 1950s. Domestic violence was rarely discussed openly on television, and sitcoms were expected to remain comforting and safe. What had once been accepted as comedic exaggeration suddenly felt disturbingly realistic. Letters reportedly began arriving at CBS expressing discomfort with the scene. Critics who had praised the show's realism now argued it had crossed an invisible line. Behind the scenes, CBS executives were already nervous. Although the Honeymooners remained popular, ratings had begun to soften slightly. Sponsors had become increasingly uncomfortable with the show's rougher tone compared to cleaner family sitcoms. Live television also created constant risks. Gleason was famous for improvisation, emotional performances, and unpredictable energy. That spontaneity made the show brilliant, but also terrified advertisers who wanted total control over their image. The controversial moment in the deciding vote intensified those fears. According to stories from people connected to production, at least one sponsor threatened to reconsider support unless the show softened its tone. Private meetings between executives reportedly followed quickly. Then, almost without warning, the original version of The Honeymooners ended after only 39 episodes. There was no dramatic announcement, no public scandal. One week the show existed, and the next it was gone. For Jackie Gleason, the cancellation was deeply personal. Ralph Cramden was not simply a television role. He was a reflection of Gleason's own upbringing, frustrations, and experiences. Losing the series felt like losing part of himself. At the same time, the pressure of producing live television every week had become overwhelming. The cast rehearsed constantly, knowing millions of viewers would witness every mistake in real time. There were no retakes. That pressure affected everyone involved, especially Gleason. His demanding lifestyle, long nights, and heavy drinking added to the strain. Producing emotionally intense live comedy at such a high level week after week was exhausting. Still, Gleason refused to abandon the characters completely. In a surprisingly smart business move, he purchased the rights to the Honeymooners from CBS. That decision allowed him to revive Ralph, Alice, and Ed Norton for future projects over the next 2 decades. During the 1960s, Gleason attempted to bring the Honeymooners back as part of the Jackie Gleason show, filmed in Miami. This revival looked very different from the original. The gritty Brooklyn realism was replaced by cleaner sets and a more polished television style. Episodes became longer and slower. Most importantly, the revival lost the dangerous energy of live performance. The original show thrived on unpredictability. Audiences never knew if Gleason might improvise, stumble, or explode emotionally. That tension created excitement. The Miami episodes were taped and edited, removing much of the spontaneity that made the first version feel special. Although the cast reunited and moments of brilliance remained, many fans believed the original magic could never truly return. Ironically, the Honeymooners became more influential after it ended. Reruns introduced the original 39 episodes to new generations of viewers during the late 1960s and 1970s. Freed from network pressure and sponsor concerns, audiences could finally appreciate how groundbreaking the series had been. The show's influence spread everywhere. Without the Honeymooners, there might never have been shows like All in the Family, Roseanne, or even The Simpsons. Ralph Crammer's DNA could be seen in Archie Bunker, Homer Simpson, and countless flawed sitcom husbands that followed. Even animated couples like Fred and Wilma Flintstone borrowed heavily from Ralph and Alice. What once seemed controversial eventually became television history. The famous bang, zoom, line transformed from an uncomfortable moment into a nostalgic cultural reference quoted across America. Over time, audiences remembered the warmth beneath Ralph and Alice's arguments rather than the tension surrounding the show's cancellation. By the 1980s, The Honeymooners was widely recognized as one of the most important sitcoms ever created. Today, the story of The Honeymooners stands as more than entertainment history. It represents a turning point in American television. The moment sitcoms stopped pretending families were perfect and started reflecting real human frustration, ambition, and love. The controversy surrounding the infamous live broadcast revealed how powerful realism could be on television. It also showed how quickly networks and sponsors became uncomfortable when comedy felt too authentic. Jackie Gleason created something television had never seen before. Characters who were messy, loud, imperfect, and deeply believable. That honesty changed the medium forever. And although the original run lasted only 39 episodes, the impact of The Honeymooners continues more than half a century later. Proof that sometimes the shows that burn brightest leave the deepest mark on television history.